What we're talking about tonight is a very central subject to all of spiritual life. And for those of you who are trained already in the teachings of Yogananda, much of what I'm going to say will be at least consistent with what you've heard before. Those of you who may have been studying in other paths and everything, there might be parts of it that are a little different. I'll give you a chance to ask questions and we can try to reconcile those contradictions. I can't always, but at least we can make an effort if we need to. What I'm presenting to you is not my own opinion, but the way Paramhansa Yogananda defined the process of spiritual awakening, the inner reality, and how those teachings were conveyed to me by Swami Kriyananda. I have, of course, practiced for many years, and I've thought and reflected and meditated on these principles, but I'm also representing a teaching that has an authority greater than my own. So I'm not making this up, okay? Like Dave Barry would always say, I'm not making this up. I'm not making this up. The subject of Kundalini is a very esoteric one when people think about it. And there's a lot of practices that are all about the Kundalini and Kundalini experiences. And what people are talking about is inner energy moving. Generally, we think of it as rising, but the fact of the matter is it falls also. It's the flow of energy that is really our life force. And even though it has an esoteric implication that people are used to thinking of, the fact of the matter is that we live and breathe is the fact of the Kundalini energy. Kundalini energy is the power of the infinite animating us. And how that energy flows, how much it flows, which direction it flows, whether it flows harmoniously or disharmoniously, is the complete definition of who we are. Paramahansa Yogananda says that the first cell in the body, when the sperm and ovum come together, that's the beginning of the manifestation of a physical body. And the place where that first cell begins is right here at the medulla. And this he describes as the seat of our individuality. This is where our ego self is physically centered in the body. The ego self, as distinct from the infinite self, Yogananda defined, I'm not sure if this is really going to be that visible, but I'll do my best. He defined ego is the soul identified with the body. The body is, however, three components. The physical body that we're living in now, the astral body, which is very similar in its demeanor to this one, but it exists only on the energy plane, and it's when the physical body dies. We have the movies now have made it perfectly clear to us. We don't have to depend on anything. The actor falls over, and then the same actor gets up, except that now he shimmers, and he walks through the walls, but he's still essentially himself. That's the astral body. And then even more subtle than that is the causal body. There are three realities at all times existing. Everything that happens on this planet begins with a thought, then you apply energy to that thought, and then you finally manifest it. If you decide you want to get your hair cut, you decide that you need a haircut, you go and make an appointment and have your hair cut, and then you have a haircut. And the biggest building, whatever they call the building that they replaced the World Trade Center with, the name escapes me at the Freedom Tower, somebody had the idea for that, didn't they? Applied an enormous amount of energy, and now it stands there. The soul itself, and the actual better word than soul is the word jiva. Jiva is that unique spark of individuality which is us, which is myself, throughout all eternity. We were singing, some of you who came in a little early, I am the bubble, make me the sea. Well, the sea is composed of bazillions of little bubbles, but each of those bubbles still has individuality in the sense of cosmic creation, and each of us in our individuality, that's the jiva. We use the word soul in English, but it doesn't have as clear a meaning as the word jiva does. Jiva is my infinite self, my little bubble. I'm not everything in creation, but this is the part of me that endures. And when the jiva identifies with the body, the physical body, the astral body, and the causal body. That's what gives us an ego. And an ego is not really our enemy. I mean, the ego's identification with this limited versus the eternal reality can cause us to make bad judgments and get very confused as to where our best interests lie. But still, the ego is essential, because if you're going to live in this physical body and be in the astral world between your physical incarnations, you have to identify with that. You have to participate in that. It's required of us that we use our willpower to move through this particular creation. Swami Kriyananda described himself, he said, he never identifies with Swami Kriyananda, meaning the individual, separate, but he considers Kriyananda to be an event for which he is responsible. And that's a good way of defining the way the jiva can participate in this individual life experience, but not allow itself to become limited. And the degree to which we are identified with limitation is the degree to which we suffer. Because once we are engaged and committed to a temporary reality, every time that reality changes, it tends to stress us out a good bit. Okay? So the center of ego in the physical body is right here at the medulla. And this is the only part of the human body that can't be operated on. They say that if even a feather touch comes right here, then life is extinguished just like that. You know, if you get a brain tumor, when it reaches this point, that's the end, because that is the meeting point between the life force and the physical manifestation. And once that life force is gone, the physical body just becomes an inert thing. If you've ever seen a body after the soul leaves, it's just startling how non-alive it is the only way I can say it. It's so alive, even if the person is comatose and still breathing, it's still the identification with that person. But once the jiva has withdrawn from that body, then it ceases to have any reality at all. A woman friend of mine described when her father died, as many people do, they choose to exit when no one who's attached to them is around, and no one to whom they are attached is around. People often carry this great guilt. I only left my mother for 15 minutes, and those were the minutes when she chose to die. But she was probably waiting all that time until the hold of her love for you and your love for her, which had served its purpose, but now had to be left behind when that pressure wasn't there. So my friend went back to the hospital, having just left the hospital. She walked into the room where her father's body was lying, and she said she was simultaneously aware of a number of things at the same time. The first was that her father was in the room. The second was that his body was not him. And the third was that, having, as she put it, only known him through that body, she had made the natural mistake of thinking that they were the same thing. But now that they had divided themselves, it was very obvious to her that it was the jiva to whom she was relating, and the identification had been severed. But the tie with that individuality between the two of them was still as strong as ever. It just was no longer through that body, no longer therefore father and daughter even. Because once that body is gone, you see all that identification is gone. So Yogananda further describes that when the sperm and the ovum come together, which is when a man and a woman have intercourse and those two cells meet, which doesn't happen as often as sex happens, it only happens occasionally, there's a flash of light in the astral world, and those souls who are in tune with that, who are ready to reincarnate into the physical world, for whom this would be an appropriate birth, then those souls, or that soul, is drawn to that particular womb. The way Yogananda said it is that more than one could have found that womb suitable, and there's kind of, as he literally put it, a rush to get in. And sometimes two will get in there at the same time. That sounds so random, and all I can say is that's simply the way he put it. When I told a friend of mine this story, when a friend of mine heard this in class, she came and told me later, her son was now almost a grown man, And this incident had happened when he was 5 years old, when she didn't have any context for what he told her. That's why it was so intriguing when she heard what I said. She said her son is a very strong-minded man, but he's a little bit, when he's a little indecisive. When he makes a decision, he'll often hesitate and then think about it before he's able to go ahead. So she said when he was 5, he became very angry with his mother. And as little children do, they want to punish you as best they can. She said, you're a terrible mommy and I hate you. He said like that. And then he turned and stomped out. And then he decided he had more to say. So he turned back and he came to her and he said, you weren't even my first choice. Like that. And she became very interested. She said, well, darling, who was your first choice? And then he answered. He said, a lady in the Philippines, but she was taken. And when I talked about this, the 2 or more, that there's a rush to get in, she started laughing because she said she can just see him in the astral world, sort of seeing that lady in the Philippines and starting for her womb, but then hesitating a moment. And then while he hesitated, someone else got in. So he got stuck with her after all, like this. We have many karmic lessons to learn, and therefore there are lots of different ways we could learn them. You have to be very advanced before your choices are so narrow. I mean, that's the other side of this story. It's not that where you are isn't exactly where you need to be, but you have lots of lessons to learn. And I can't answer it more than that. I don't know. So the two, the sperm and the ovum unite, and then when you are looking, I've seen these books, I've never been pregnant myself, but I've seen these books, you're developing embryo, and they show you, starting from a very early age, all the different phases that the fetus goes through as it grows into a viable child, a baby within you. And the first thing that happens, it looks like a stick, like a little potato stick or like a toothpick. And what Master said that is that from the medulla, the energy goes down and makes the spine. Because the spine is where the life force lives. And if you think about what kind of a human body can still carry on, you can reduce the human body down to the head and the trunk. You can have no legs, you can be cut off very high on the hips, you can have no arms, you obviously need a head, but that's what you need. If you cut it any further than that, it can't survive, but it can survive down to that, because that gives you the chakras. Because the physical body is made on the blueprint pattern of the energy body, and the energy body is defined by this central energy, which is the chakras, in which the chakras are there to allow the flow of Kundalini energy. Kundalini energy is simply life force. And what happens when we manifest a physical body is that we go from the non-physical world, which is where we're hanging out between these incarnations, and we have to manifest all the way into physical creation. When we lay out the chakras, this is not going to be a deep course on the subject, but an introduction. When we lay out the chakras, there, into the navel chakra, the heart chakra, the throat, and the spiritual eye. And you define these according to the elements. The first chakra is the earth. Earth, of course, is the material world. And when the Kundalini comes in, and this chakra here, I'll put the little eyes there. There are the eyes, there's the nose, there's the mouth. Okay, the medulla, one of the things that Yogananda introduced into the subject of the chakras, which is very interesting, which is that he defined the medulla and the spiritual eye as the opposite poles of the same chakra. Most people don't talk about the medulla, they only talk about the spiritual eye. But he says these are the opposite poles of the same chakra because this is the chakra of self-identification. And it's a very interesting and important point that Yogananda in his teachings of Kriya and all of that makes a strong point of. Because we identify either with this pole of the chakra or with this pole of the chakra. When we're identified here, We are the jiva identified with the body that we're inhabiting. When we're identified with the positive pole, as it's called, of the spiritual I, we are this jiva identified with the infinite. And we can live in the world perfectly well. We have to have an individual identity to manifest in this world. But all the great masters who have ever lived, all the great saints who have ever lived, have manifested a full physical body. But instead of their self-definition being trapped here with the limited reality, their self-definition is here at the spiritual I with the infinite reality. Now, it's not an all or nothing proposition either. It's like we alternate, we move around, we are partially on good days we're in one place and on bad days we're in another. But it's a gradual progression. That's what all of spiritual progress is, a transference of self-identity from the ego self to the infinite self. It's just as simple as that. I mean, it's as simple as that in theory. The practice of it is more complicated because of all that's going on in the chakras, which we'll talk about. So when the little potato stick is made, and that energy descends, it descends all the way to the earth chakra. And everybody has energy in all of these chakras because all of them are required in order for us to function in the material world. I'll talk about this in a moment. Just to explain it, earth, water, fire, air. The word ether is used here. It's a philosophical term, not a chemical term. It's that invisible force which is more subtle than air. And then the Yogananda just coined the phrase super ether, which doesn't really, have an exact definition. But what this is the spirit becoming more and more dense. And going backwards, the spirit becoming less and less dense as it's liberated from its commitment to solid matter. Now, there's a force that pulls us into manifestation, and that force is our own desire, our own unfinished karma. There are things that we don't know, that we want to learn, that we have to experience, that we can't experience in any other way unless we are, fully here on the material plane. And it's those unfinished karmic lessons that create an actual magnetism, and that's what pulls us in at that first flash of light, and that's what pulls the energy all the way to the bottom chakra. Now, the Kundalini energy is that life force, and it becomes locked at this point. This is what keeps us in our body, is that we have energy that, let me just think. Okay. Well, it's that self-definition. All that we are is a pattern of energy. This is even a scientific fact. There's no fixed reality to anything that we see around us that appears to be fixed. It's just vibrations on very subtle levels that are perceived by us and experienced by us as solid matter. And our own identification and belief in this level of reality keeps our energy locked at the earth chakra. When a person dies, if you have the opportunity to watch, we're born, we descend like this, and when we die, the energy just goes backwards. I was with a friend who died of brain cancer, and she lost consciousness at the end, and she was just breathing. And you just watched. First, the extremities became out of her control. She was no longer inhabiting the extremities of her body. She was inhabiting the center of her body. Her breathing was lower, and then you just literally just watched her body close down. The breathing got more and more shallow until it just was done. It was just like a demonstration. That's how it enters, and that's how it exits. Now, most of us only exit when we die, because we remain so strongly identified with this physical body that there's no way that we can withdraw the life force from it. But now that we have all these examples from India and various other teachers speaking to us, and we talk about people going breathless, We talk about people withdrawing the life force. We have extraordinary examples of people living for very long periods of time or going into unusual states of suspended animation, where they just stop breathing. But the body doesn't die, but the jiva has withdrawn so much from the physical reality that nothing is required except the smallest bit of energy just holding at this point, so that the whole flow of the chakras will be maintained. Now, what's going on in spiritual life is there is this tension that we're all living with, and the tension is toward our identification with the material world. Now, I'm not talking about the amount of energy that's required there just to keep your physical body animated. Now, I'm talking about on a different level. We're always living in this state of tension between these two forces. There's the part of us that knows that our true happiness lies in self-expansion, in perfect love, in absolute acceptance, in harmony with the divine. And then there's the other part of us that is holding on to this idea that I am separate, that I have to maintain my separate identity, that my ego self requires certain things to happen. I mean, the body needs certain comforts, it needs certain food, I need to live in a certain place, I need certain relationships. This is who I am. And the other side of it says, no, you're none of those things. You're simply infinite spirit. This is between the earth and the spiritual eye, between the earth reality and the super ether reality. And all of our lives, in our human lives, we're playing this out, aren't we? You know, we have this idea once we become somewhat spiritually awakened, that really all I really want is to live in harmony with my divine self, to understand God's Leela, God's play in this world. And the other part of me says, oh, I really want somebody to love me. I'm so lonely, I have to have this in my life. I'm so insecure unless I have a certain amount of money. I'm cold, I need a sweater. I'm hungry, I need lunch. You know, just all of these different bodily imperatives that are there demanding, and they're always in conflict with this idea that I am the infinite spirit and ever free. And that pushing outward into the material world, the Kundalini energy goes there, and then it's locked there. And our effort spiritually, again, is to transfer our sense of self to the infinite, but there's an actual force that's pulling in the opposite direction. And all spiritual traditions have words for it. It's called the devil, okay, or Satan. And it's a reality, isn't it? And the reason that all spiritual traditions talk about this is not only because it's there, but it's what we experience, isn't it? That there's part of us, there's the angelic side, and there's the devilish side of us. There's our desire to be good and to be free, and then something makes us mess up, doesn't it? One of my favorite expressions is, the devil made me do it. I like that expression. It's a good excuse. Now, in the Indian tradition, they have a more subtle word, and that word is Maya. And what Maya means is this, the magician, the delusive force, the illusion that just captures us. And they give Maya female. It's she. Maya is a feminine form. And no, it's not because of that. It's because the feminine represents the miasma of feeling and how it can take over our reason. Because that is what happens. Feminine is the feeling side, and masculine is the reason side. And it doesn't matter what gender your body is, we all have the two of them, and they're always in dynamic interplay. And the feeling can take over the reason very easily. Isn't that true? And when feeling takes over reason, and when we finally emerge from the miasma that's created, it doesn't make any sense to us, those decisions we made. But just think about it in your everyday life. We do things all the time that when we come out of the miasma, we can't really figure out why we made that decision. And so that's the power of Maya, that is always giving us the idea, you know, that this is a good idea and it feels right to do this and this is what I ought to do. And we live in this divided state with ourselves, and that's one of the hardest things even about being a spiritual person. Many years ago, when meditation was just really early beginning, like the 60s, late 60s, early 70s, there was a magazine, I think I actually just saw the current version of it, Psychology Today, and they wrote an article about meditation, which was not at all the, you know, the worldwide wave it is now. It was a very esoteric thing. And they wrote an article, and it was called The Dark Side of Meditation. Right. And the article was that many of the people who take up meditation take it up because they're what they used to call type A. Is that still a phrase? You know, type A, competitive driven people. And so those are the people who are driven to take up meditation because they're so neurotic and nervous and they need a way to calm down. But they take up meditation in a type A competitive manner. And since the goal of meditation is perfection, then the people who are practicing it are always neurotic because they simply can't attain that perfection. So this was called the dark side of meditation. But in fact, this is what every spiritual person has to learn to live with, which is that we are ourselves both sides of this. That we have incarnated because we have these desires that are pushing us, you know, into the limited world, and we have awakened enough to know that we want to move in the other direction. And it doesn't serve us, and this is something that every aspiring devotee has to work out. It doesn't serve us to be at war with ourselves. And that's one of the most unfortunate things that I end up seeing happen with people, is you end up being at war with yourself, which is you want to be one way, you're not really fulfilling your own aspirations, so what you're not doing becomes the enemy of what you're trying to do, and you just end up in an enormous conflict. I've never seen that help anybody. At the same time, we are living with this reality all the time, because this is our fundamental nature, is the energy circulates all the way to the earth chakra. And it keeps flowing like that. Now what we really want to have happen with our energy, it comes in through the medulla, is that we actually want it to circulate through the chakras. Ideally it goes like this. It circulates. And so we draw energy in through the medulla, it circulates through the chakras, and then it makes a continuous loop, a wave like that. The wave is actually twisted, which is why spiraled, which is why when you're meditating sometimes you feel the energy moving you like that, because it's spiraling through. It's not just going up and down. It is going up and down, but more in a feeling like this. All right? And that's why the Jews daven. That's what davening, that's where it came from. Probably people who were having actual Kundalini experiences were just spontaneously moving. And so then people started making it part of their practice. Now it's just people just rocking back and forth. But what they're trying to find is this feeling of the energy moving. Now what happens to us much of the time, and this has to be explained now, every time you have any impulse at all, you are responding according to your perception of reality. All of us are. You know, I can talk about death, and I can talk about freedom, and I can talk about not being the body and all of those things, but if I'm in a car and I think that car is going to be hit, my invariable response is like that. You know, there's a piece of me that just suddenly, instead of going to the infinite, goes immediately to where my body is and what's about to happen to it. And many years ago in California, where I live, we had a notable earthquake. We've had a number of them, but this was one of the bigger ones that we had where I live. It was big enough to collapse a piece of the Bay Bridge. So it was, for those of you who know, I watched your catastrophes on this side and you've watched ours. You might have seen that bridge collapse many, many times. But I was inside a wooden building when, a two-story wooden building when the earthquake started. And wood is a good building material for earthquakes because it's very flexible. And so the building just started moving a lot. And it's so funny. I'm a wordsmith, I guess, to my core. But what you do in an emergency, it really tells where you've been thinking. The first thing I thought was earthquake-proof is oxymoronic. Because if God wants to take it, he will take it. There's just no way. So I'm watching this building shake, realizing that there's no safety here. And my thought is the problem was the building. Because I was inside the building, it was shaking, and it was just a little apartment that faced onto a garden. So I stepped out of the apartment, which I could do in a matter of seconds, and I walked out into this big lawn area. Amazing just to suddenly, earthquakes are unique because there is no place that it isn't happening. There's no way you can, a fire you can watch, but it's happening right where you're standing. So I was inside, outside, and that which had always been stable was not stable, just not at all. And I became quite alarmed. Other people told me that they immediately started, thinking about divine things, and I didn't. And it was very interesting to me that my first concern was just all those levels of fear and anxiety and what's going to happen as I watched the water in the swimming pool just sort of crest over this 5-foot fence, and most of the water come out in a small but still notable tidal wave. And you're watching everything just moving like this. It only lasted 30 seconds or something, but that's very long in such a moment. And I just committed myself with my energy to what I believed was real in that moment, which was not, I am embarrassed to say, whatever you want, God, here I am, take me. It was more on the level of, oh my God, what is happening? Like this. So between absolute commitment to myself as a separate entity where my well-being entirely depends on the protection of this body that I have identified with, and therefore with everything that also I call my own because of this body I'm living in. If you think about it, you see, your mother, your father, your children, your siblings, your career, your creative pursuits, all of it is in one way or another connected to the body that you're living in, isn't it? And is this really who I am? Or when all of this evaporates, will I still exist, and who will I be then? Years ago in California, there was an anti-nuclear initiative, and it was very well organized by a spiritual group. And they came to Ananda and wanted to persuade Swami Kriyananda to back their project. And as projects go, it was better than many. It was extremely well-meaning, and they were well organized, and they were doing good work. I believe it was a ballot initiative in California at the time. And so they had this presentation that they'd worked out, and they offered it. And they had worked out what would happen if a nuclear bomb struck a major population area. And I don't know what city they had chosen arbitrarily, Chicago or Detroit or New York or what it was. But they showed you that all the people within this first circle will be simply vaporized, and that will be approximately how many hundreds of thousands. All of these people, there will be charred remains, and then these people will have radiation sickness. It was just, went out, and it was grim. And it was true. It was factual, that's what it was. And it was a very compelling and professional presentation. Afterwards, they were waiting for Swami Kriyananda because they were hoping he'd put his energy behind it. And he said, first of all, he commended them for their good intentions. And then he said, but I don't think when peace is your objective, fear is the right method. That's the second thing he said. Then the third thing he said was, whether over the next 100 years, almost no one who's living on this planet will still be here. We will all have, almost everyone will have left. He said, whether we dribble out over many decades or we all depart at one time, he said, once we're in the astral world, it doesn't make any difference. Once you have left this plane of existence behind and all that you were and all that you're doing, it's all related to your identification with this physical body. There's an energy behind that, but the degree to which our egos define us, the degree to which our self-definition is here, it's all about this. And therefore, anytime any of that is threatened, that's when we react. Someone you love tells you they don't want to be with you anymore, you react. You go to the doctor, he tells you you have cancer, you react. There's all of these things because if this is missing. And so somewhere between I am defined by the body I'm living in and I am the infinite spirit, if you considered it like vibrations on a piano, every single nuance of reality between perfect freedom and perfect physical bondage, so to speak, would have an exact vibration. And it isn't a matter of what you say. It's really just a matter of actually, literally, how you vibrate. And whatever you're vibrating at, whatever you're thinking, I mean, when you walk down the street and you see yourself in the mirror and you say, oh, I wish I weighed 20 pounds less. Or, oh, my hair used to look nicer. You know, or I see this handsome man over here, oh, I'd like to be like him. You're making a definition about where my happiness is, who I am, who I'm not, what I want, and it registers. This is the reality of this. We identify with our own actions, and they stay with us. And they don't just stay with you through one lifetime, they stay with you lifetime after lifetime after lifetime. This is what the chakras are. They are the registration of all the nuances of our consciousness, and they stay with us from the spectrum, from complete physical identity to divine identity. Now, there's more complication here. Lower chakras are not all bad. Every chakra has its positive and negative expression. But right now I'm just talking about it as the bank. And what happens to us over time is we develop what has happened to us is that each of these chakras has an energy field in it. Bear in mind, this is not physical. Someone wrote to me once that they'd had a hysterectomy, and she wanted to know how she could meditate now that she didn't have a second chakra. No, I don't think so. I think you're just fine. But in each of the chakras, what happens is you develop this magnetic field of energy. And it's called a vritti. There's no English equivalent. It just means a whirlpool. Vritti means whirlpool. It's a whirlpool of energy. And it starts with the thought, I'm in an earthquake. I'm afraid my body's going to die in an earthquake. I have made a strong commitment to this as my reality. And it has a certain vibratory note. And so in the appropriate chakra, self-preservation, self-will, whatever it might be, a little vritti is formed, or a big vritti is formed, and it's a whirlpool of energy that's exactly as powerful as I committed to it. And if you commit to the same thoughts every day, day after day, then these particular vrittis get stronger and stronger. If every day you say, I wish I were someone else, that commitment, that deep identification with your physical self, with this egoic self, the resistance to it, and then all of the chakras, they all just vibrate with whatever energy we have stored in them. And depending on the relative force of each of those, your life is run. Just as simple as that. You're run by that magnetic field that you yourself have created. This is your karma, actually, literally. So when your physical body dies, this energy pattern, which is the whirling fields of energy in all of your chakras, that's what goes with you. That's how karma is carried from lifetime to lifetime. It's not the exact puppy that died. It's the desire in your heart to have another puppy, or the grief in your heart because something you love did not come through for you. And that commitment, that belief that unless I have that, I won't be happy, rather than understanding that I am one with the infinite and my true nature is bliss. What we're doing with all of these vrittis in the chakras is we are conditioning our happiness. And as long as we condition our happiness, we are vulnerable, aren't we? To whether we get it or not. That's where feeling always conquers reason. And the Kundalini energy coming through the medulla has to keep, I think of it as the UPS truck with a certain number of deliveries to make. instead of the energy being able to circulate and then rise and circulate and just keep a smooth magnetic field going that allows us to be a powerful force in the world, all of those little vrittis, when the energy comes in, it has to be distributed. So a certain amount of energy will come into your being, but a whole lot of it is pre-committed. So it will go down to the earth chakra, but not much can come back up, because so much of it has to go to keep all those vrittis running. All those fears, all those worries, all the resentments from past lives, it all just carries through. I was in another talk somewhere in this week, I was talking about an experience I had when I was in seclusion, and I was trying to experience the love that God was giving me, rather than thinking about what I could give back. But I realized that my heart was holding an astonishing amount of hurt. And it was very interesting to me, because I'd been in seclusion for a while, so I was in a fairly more sensitized state than I would be in my normal life, where we're so distracted. I was very conscious of the fact that nothing I was carrying had anything to do even with this incarnation. A little bit of it I recognized from some difficult interactions I have had in this incarnation, which are inexplicable if I only think about what's happened in this life. But you know, it was anxieties that I carried from unresolved issues, and I could just feel it. I could feel resentments, I could feel broken heart, I could feel a sense of mistreatment, you know, that why weren't people thinking about me? That's what it really came down to. What about me? They were all just thinking about themselves. What about me? And I was justified in some of those feelings, and others were exaggerated sense of being a victim. But it didn't really make any difference. They were as real in my heart. They were vrittis of energy that had happened to me at some time in the course of my many incarnations, and I was still feeding them. They were still holding enough that a lot of my Kundalini energy, instead of being able to go out, manifest my body, and then circulate back up and be used for higher purposes, just had to go to keep these wheels spinning. Just keep them spinning like that. And this is among many reasons why so often we set an intention. But when I've watched people do this, because in the position I've been in for so many years of drawing people into a spiritual life, I've often had people tell me with such commitment what they're going to do, and then they just don't do it. And they themselves sometimes are almost unaware, because you think you're looking like this, but when you start sending your energy out, all these vrittis take it, and you end up over here. And you were on your way to meditate, but you ended up downstairs having coffee. How did that happen? You know? Because you were interested in meditating, but then the energy just got sucked in over here, right? Or just anything. And we're always working with these balancing of factors. Now, so the vrittis are what keep the Kundalini from rising. Because the Kundalini is going to go all the way to the base of the spine in order to manifest the physical body. But then when it wants to start rising again, it just gets waylaid. Just like a river trying to flow, or one year I've never worked I lived at a village in the early years, in 1971 on, when we were doing a lot of gardening there. I went into the kitchen. You sort of went into one of three places. You either went to build buildings, to grow food, or to cook the food. And I went into cooking the food, so I didn't grow it very much. But every once in a while I helped in the garden, and there was this long row of beans, and we were working with very simple situations. This long row of beans, and I was given a hoe, and there was a little furrow down the side, and there was water trickling down that furrow, and I was handed, and my job was to keep the water flowing. Didn't look like much of a job to me, because there was the water flowing, but the farmer just said to me, "You'll see." Because the water didn't really have any commitment to the beans. The water was just going to find whatever way it could find. It didn't really care where it went. You know, we were so aware of the beans, but it didn't know anything about the beans. So the slightest little pebble, the slightest little kind of crack, and the water just drained out in any direction at all. And I had to just very assiduously keep that water going right and only where we wanted it to go. Well, this is exactly what happens with this energy. It's not really, it's neutral in itself. It's just energy. Energy it's just energy. How you direct it is whether or not it proves to be fruitful for your higher aspirations or dissipated in terms of your higher aspirations. So these vrittis are what keeps the Kundalini from rising all the time. Otherwise, the Kundalini would just go in that circulated form, and that's why someone like Swami Kriyananda, as an example, who had resolved all of these many lifetimes, literally, of thoughts and desires, and I have to have this and I need that. His energy was very clean and straight. The only thing he really wanted in his life was to be a good disciple and to live according to his guru's teachings. I mean, it was amusing to me. I knew Swami from the age when he was 44, I was 22, or something close to that. And I traveled with him all over the world. I worked with him. I just knew him in many different circumstances for like 45 years. And it was so interesting to me because I enjoy what I will call downtime. You know, I get pleasure out of laziness. I find that to be a very positive experience, not as a way of life, but, you know, when the time comes, I'm not averse to it. Swami never enjoyed being lazy. He had just all of these vrittis that say, oh, I'll just curl up over here and, you know, just do nothing for a little while, just be a little baby, you know, I'm not going to take responsibility, or I'm not going to have to think of anything higher, I'm just going to watch 3 or 4 movies in a row like this, you know, just that complete nothing. Swami never found any pleasure in that. His happiness always came from giving, always living on a higher vibration. I vacationed with him many times. Groups of us would vacation. We'd just wait for it. Well, he said, what time shall we have breakfast? You know, we'd be rooting for 11 a.m. How about 8:30? He would say, oh, all right, you know, we'll just get up at 8:30. He wasn't wasting any energy. He just had one thought, which is, I'm here to serve God and I'm going to serve God. I never knew, and I believe this is true, I don't think one day ever went by in the 86 years, the 60 years of his being a disciple, when he didn't do some creative work and something serviceful, including the day before and after open heart surgery, when he was editing a book. You know, or nearly dying in the hospital in Delhi and counseling the doctor about how to live an honorable, honest life. Swami had double pneumonia, and Swami said later, he said, I hardly seemed a good example, you know, at that moment. But the doctor was talking to him, and so from near unconsciousness, Swami's talking to the man about dharma and righteousness and right living, because his energy was not lost. And that was why he was what he was like, which is he just had such a powerful, uplifting energy, and the quantity of energy and the unrelenting creativity, because he didn't have it all pre-committed, right? So what we're doing in the spiritual life is we're trying to dissolve these vrittis. And there's many different ways that people do it. The ideal way to work with it, and every time I talk about the energy circulating, you see, what we really want is we want all of the energy that goes all the way even to the earth chakra to be guided by the principles that are defined at the spiritual eye, you see. We don't want the earth chakra to be in charge. We want the earth chakra to be guided by the spiritual eye, because now that I recognize that my happiness lies in harmony with a greater reality, now that I understand that this is who I am and where I'm going, how should I behave in this world? Rather than having just being in this world be in charge of being in this world. And you see people. I went once, coming into town, Kai was pointing out different buildings, including the New York City prison, which is a very impressive building. I was remembering I have a friend who's been wrongly incarcerated for many years in California prisons. And the first time I met him, he was in a county jail, which was very small. It was the first time I'd ever been inside a jail or a prison. Since that time visiting him, I've been in more than I would like to have been in. But this one was like a movie set. This one was like a concrete hallway, about a room about this wide, no windows, of course. And on either side, there were cells, and the cells were just like the movies, you know, these wide bars like this. And you looked in, and people were just gathered there, and then there was a wide hallway down the middle. It was a men's prison. I had dressed in a gunny sack, essentially, because I was going into a men's prison. I thought the less female I looked, the better. And I walked down the absolute center of the hallway because of the prisoners on both sides. It was so intimate, and I was so surprised by it. But this wasn't a long-term facility. And because it was so boring in there, they were all standing at the bars just watching me and the guards go by like this. But this is what was so amazing to me. They were all in there because they'd broken some laws, but you could feel their whole energy field was waiting to get out so they could do it again. I mean, it was just like the whole field of energy was just the same. They'd been stopped, but they hadn't been changed because their reality was not run from higher consciousness. It was there, you know, the sexual desires and material desires and power over others. That's what was moving them, and they were held back. But as soon as that was moved, they were going to go again. Whether they broke the law or not was something else, but you could just feel that force, like this. So we don't want to be like that, because it doesn't serve us, because there's not a lot of wisdom, you know, in our blind desires. It doesn't mean that we don't end up expressing them, but when we express them in cooperation with at least some higher perspective, then we're at least developing in the direction we want to go. So the vrittis are energy fields playing against each other. And you think of it exactly like a river flowing where the water gets caught into a whirlpool, right? And how do you break up that whirlpool? Well, there's usually something at the center of it. And in every vritti, there's a thought form, a consciousness, a vibration of reality in the center of it. And in a physical whirlpool, there's usually something in there, logs, a tree stump, something like that. And you can dive in there and you can start hauling the stuff out. And there's a place for trying to understand what your vrittis are. You know, I'm upset because, as a child, this happened to me. I'm upset because I remember that in a past life, I was burned as a witch. You know, I am upset this way because I allowed myself to become so angry about thus and so that happened yesterday, whatever it might be. And you can start pulling that apart. And if you don't know where your misery is coming from, if you don't know where your unhappiness is coming from, there's a great value in at least developing enough self-knowledge so that you know. This is the place of psychological counseling, of reflecting with a neutral third party and trying to figure out what motivates me. And you can eventually, perhaps, unravel. The problem of diving in and pulling out is you're just as likely to create new complexes. You know, so it's a bit dicey. Because what you really want is you want to liberate that vritti. So another way, if you're thinking of it as a river, is that the river and the vritti are in a magnetic relationship to each other, and whoever has the most force gets the water delivery. You know, you have a lot. If the river is flowing a little bit, even small things can create whirlpools. If the river is flowing in a mighty way, then everything that has less magnetism than that flow is just going to get added to the river. And it's not only going to dissolve the whirlpool, it's going to increase the flow of the river. So when we are thinking in a spiritual way, meditation, okay, now let me just say one more thing. The chakras all also play against each other, are also in a magnetic relationship to each other. Any magnetic field that's stronger than another will also draw energy down or up. So Perhaps you had a love relationship with someone, but they did something you didn't like, and you begin to feel that your self-worth is being challenged, and so you had a vritti of true love for someone, but now you're angry at them because of what they did for you, and all of a sudden that energy that was at the heart gets sucked down to the navel, or even lower. And that's how relationships can go from love to hate really easily. Because first I love you, but then when I'm mad at you, the vritti that used to be love is just eaten up. It's just gone. Because the anger, the self-will to impose on someone else becomes stronger than that love. And it wasn't that the love was never there, but now it's been eaten by the other. And on the other token, you can be very angry at someone and very wanting to get revenge. And then perhaps all of a sudden you see them in a very different light. You know, people will say that about a parent who raised them badly, and that you're very angry at them and you're always fighting against them, and then suddenly you just realize, you know, my mother, my father had a very, very difficult life. And suddenly, instead of anger, you feel compassion. And from that compassion, your heart begins to open. And suddenly you're not so angry anymore because you have created a stronger vritti. This is totally metaphysics. Metaphysics in the sense it's energy against energy. It's not anything that we do that we can manipulate. It will simply respond to exactly what's happening. So one of the ways we settle these vrittis is we act and behave according to a more refined and elevated way of being, which is why the folly of just get it out of your system tends not to work. Because when you get it out of your system, you can't tend to be creating more and more vrittis. And then those will just keep drawing you back in and back in and back in. But when you begin to do serious spiritual practice and begin to understand, and this I don't have time to explain, how each of these chakras also has a positive upward moving direction. I'll just give you the slightest example. Let's say, for example, earth energy represents security, and we either get our security from getting everything in the material world fixed in just the way we want it, or we understand that our security comes from our relationship with God. So you still are making power in the earth chakra, but if we're looking upward, literally, into the spirit for our security, instead of outward into the world to make it do what we want it to do, then that energy is no longer locked, but begins to flow. You see? So the more we can create the right direction of energy in each chakra, the more we can elevate our point of focus and create vrittis in more and more refined ways moving up the chakras, and above all, the more energy we can develop at the spiritual eye to move our very sense of identity to the spiritual eye, then what happens is the more powerfully the river flows. And when the river is flowing powerfully enough, it simply eats those vrittis and you don't have to worry about them anymore. And this is where the phrase is, don't worry about anything, just meditate. Mm-hmm. And it's true. If you meditate in a way that cooperates with this flow of energy, which is primarily to meditate at the spiritual eye, and I mean, that's a very key to this. And if you do it with enough energy, if you're just meditating, but you're really sort of like mostly asleep, and you know, and your energy and all of your meditation is about getting revenge on that noisy neighbor and what you're going to eat afterwards and the cute person that you just saw in the street yesterday, you're doing something. But if you think of it as just a magnetic relationship, you can just see how much progress you'll make. Now, I'm going to finally say the word Kriya Yoga, which was part of what we're supposed to talk about tonight. Kriya Yoga is the supreme art of generating a magnetic flow. And a powerful magnetic flow that will create just the kind of magnetism you want to just start dissolving these vrittis. And these vrittis, also remember, are your karma. So you literally work out your karma by just dissolving the vritti. The vritti, in order to work it out in life, it creates magnetism that becomes strong enough that it's manifested in front of you. The event, the circumstances, the return engagement with the people that you were upset with, or the return engagement of the same circumstances, giving you another chance. The next time the earthquake comes, I hope to be a little bit faster on the uptake when it comes. So the karma comes and it manifests in front of you. But the karma only manifests because there is a vritti that draws those circumstances to you. Dissolve the vritti, there's no karma there anymore. And Kriya is the science, really literally, of going through the chakras like this. And you do it deliberately, and what happens is then all the vrittis just gradually get dissolved. And you can skip the whole process. Yogananda described one round of Kriya, which is taking the energy all the way to the chakras and all the way back to the spiritual eye, is equal to 1 year of right living. That's presuming in 1 year of right living, the chances of creating karma as well as working it out are much higher than it is in doing one Kriya. And so this is why in Autobiography of a Yogi, he talks so powerfully about the power of Kriya and why we want to practice it. And if one is at all concerned, what was I going to say with that? Anyway, whatever that word, I forgot what the point was. Now, questions? Yes, Kelly?
At first, I was thinking that it was about me being a diva and then moving into being a jiva, right?
Uh-huh. You're very good with it.
I just created 2 more self-definitions.
Yeah, you did. Yeah. Well, Jiva is your eternal reality. It's not a self-definition. When you understand yourself to be a jiva, you have dropped all self-definitions. Because the jiva is just the bubble in the sea. So everything else is gone.
So when I take on the diva, selfishness or identification
Right.
with my ego self, how do I transform that into,
Something else?
diva?
Well, see, the more... the devil makes us do a lot of things we didn't want to do. So the first thing you have to recognize is it's not so simple. This is why I say it's not good to be at war with yourselves. People will often, because I've done a lot of counseling, they'll say exactly like this, "Oh, I know what I'm thinking is stupid." I say, no, actually it isn't stupid. You've spent a really long time developing this delusion. You've been working on it for incarnations, and it's not at all stupid. So the first thing we have to realize is there's a very complicated interplay of forces going on within us, and nothing that we think is stupid. Many things that we think and do are unwise from the point of view, ill-advised is what I would say, from the point of view of our greatest happiness, but they're not stupid. So we just have to start by exhaling. We also have, exhaling meaning just relax a little. And we also have to recognize that this is a very long project. And the difference between knowing what I ought to do and actually getting myself into a magnetic position where I can consistently make the right choices is the efforts of lifetimes. So don't be surprised. There's 2 realities that are going on here. It's very important to keep this clear. We are caught because we have made many choices in the past that seemed like a good idea at the time, but it simply affirmed the only reality we could see. If we could have seen another reality, we would have responded to it. Of course we would have. So if we responded according to this reality, it's because it was the only choice that we saw. I say, the devil made me do it, or it seemed like a good idea at the time. But honestly, if I had seen a better choice, I would have taken it. I'm not stupid, right? So at the time, that was the height of what I was going to do. Now, understand, this is very complicated. And so I'm not going to be able to just snap my fingers. Most people burn out on the spiritual path because they fail to understand what they've really undertaken. And when they begin to recognize that this is not going to just be tomorrow, it's over. This is really just step by step by step. And the best way to get out of that, the Swami was asked once, what are the keys to success on the spiritual path? He said basically to realize this is a matter of life or death, which is the alternative is unacceptable. And the alternative is simply to give up the effort Because that's what we do when we allow ourselves to become too excited about that we failed one more time, or this terrible karma just never ends. You know, my money never works out. My relationships never work out. Once again, my building is being sold. Will this never stop? The hot water heater broke. Why did the hot water heater break? You know, just because it breaks, because you've got a vritti in the spine that requires this to happen. And the alternative is worse. The alternative is just to shrink back and just let the system keep running. And so we just have to keep steadfastly resisting. And then even if we have bad days where we just really feel that everything happens by God's will and God loves everyone except me, which sometimes I know that's true. He loves everyone but me. You know, you get that thought in your mind, but then you come out of it. And so what I'm saying is, we have a certain number of vrittis, we have a certain amount of delusion we have to live through. That's the given. Don't develop a complex about that. Because they're two completely separate realities. One is, I'm not perfect, and one is, oh, I'm not perfect. And they're really different. It's bad enough not to be perfect, but it becomes impossible if you've developed a complex over it, because you see, that is an entirely other problem. So even when this problem is solved, which is very hard to solve if all your energy is going into your upset about having to solve it, first of all, very little energy goes to solving it, because it's all caught up here. And sometimes even when it's solved, you're still so busy being like this, you don't even notice. That's, the perfectionist. It's never enough. A friend of mine who was chronically depressed or chronically upset. Fortunately, I took a risk with her, and fortunately, she broke in the right way. No matter what she did, immensely talented, very highly accomplished, loved by everyone, but absolutely determined to have a sense of, I am a worthless person and nothing I do is good enough. Finally, I was talking to her, and my patience snapped. I think it was God inspired, because fortunately she laughed. I said, everybody in your world, and I named off starting with Swami Kriyananda, and I named a whole list of really great souls. They all think you're wonderful, and you insist that you alone have the right opinion and that all of us are wrong. I said, I personally feel insulted. And we were talking on Skype, she just stared at me, and then she began to laugh. You see how selfish that is? So it has nothing to do with, and she has as many inadequacies as anyone else, but not more. The biggest problem was the complex about it. Because then that's a whole nother set of vrittis that are even harder to take apart because they have no objective reality. So, welcome to the human race. Swami Kriyananda was so easy about our failings. I remember once I came to him and I said, sir, you asked me to do this very important thing, and I just can't do it. I'm just not capable. And he didn't, there wasn't a nanosecond of hesitation. Well, he said, so much for theory, let's deal with reality. And then we just went from there. And when, people would make big messes, Swami would say things like, well, these things happen. These things happen. Just, there we are, because we have these vrittis, and the energy gets sucked in the wrong direction. And then we just go back. And the ones who last are the ones who last, meaning just persevere. And therefore, Master said, just don't give up. Success is defined by not giving up. And I have certainly seen that. The only way you can lose is just to stop trying. And then even then you don't lose, you just hang out. You hang out at whatever vibration of consciousness you're presently in, and you get to keep it for a while longer. And how's that working for you? It's just like our decision. Okay. Another question, yes, Colleen?
Isn't it like, it's the power of belief when you want to get out of your own story, when you're mad enough. Not mad enough in the sense of mad enough, but standing your ground, focus that you put into it. You don't want your story anymore. The insecurity, those vrittis that are sitting in the way, we're done with it. You sit and you go, that's it, I'm done with it. It's past, it's moved on. Can we move those vrittis very quickly with that belief and that focus?
It's metaphysics. As much energy as it took to build it is as much energy as it's going to take to dismantle it. In theory, the power of thought is so great you could dissolve it all in an instant. In fact, Do you have that power, that much power, that you could free all that energy up and direct as much energy toward dissolving it as you spent building it? Usually not. And oftentimes when people get too caught up in the thought that I can just dissolve this, it just boomerangs on them because they can't. And you either become confused about your own nature, you start living a false affirmation, and then you've created a whole nother reality where I'm living this false affirmation. I used to get, not so much lately, but I used to get refugees. I used to call them refugees from the New Age. People who were told that they could just do anything just by affirming it or by this, and then they couldn't. And so they thought it was their failure. But the teaching is false. Because unless you have the same amount of power that you can generate in an instant that you spent incarnations building up the delusion, no, you can't dissolve it. However, a positive, affirmative attitude that I will be able to resolve it if I persevere. And so often also, this is the quick fix. I don't want to have to put one foot in front of the other. I don't want to have to meditate for the next 15 years. I don't have to fail and pick myself up again and fail and pick myself up again and fail and pick myself up again. I want it to be over, so I'm just going to declare it over.
I was thinking of the yoga and the frog story where he's trying to get up.
Well, he keeps trying, yeah.
So, yeah, and through his will, through the divine will,
Right. But what he did was he didn't become a God-realized master. He was a frog trapped in a bucket of milk, and he turned the milk into butter.
Right.
Yeah, by not giving up.
By not giving up.
But that's, yeah, keep turning the milk into butter, and then you'll hop onto dry land, and then you'll get to deal with all the vrittis related to dry land. You had a question?
Answered my question.
Okay. There's no shortcut.
Yeah.
Once you're really seriously dealing with karma, chakras, Kundalini, Kriya Yoga, you're on the right road, but there's no shortcut. And even the desire for a shortcut is a vritti.
Yeah.
Because what's it's saying is, I actually, I want to have an even bank account, but I don't really want to pay these debts. I use my charge card a lot, but now I don't really want to have to pay it. And that's really what we're saying. It just doesn't work like that. The phrase, no free lunch, it just isn't so. You can get the best meal for the best price by doing Kriya, but still, everything that you put in, you're going to have to undo. Now, many other factors come in. The grace of God, the intercession of the Guru, many, and right action, right living, right service, all of those things will help. But still, eventually, wherever it comes from, it has to be the same amount of energy in a positive direction that you have invested in the wrong direction. And that's one of the reasons why we start being really good. You just start being good, because it's not worth it to be bad anymore. Because you know that if I do that, I'm just going to have to pay it off later. And so the pleasure of losing my temper and telling so-and-so what I really think of them is less than the realization that I'm going to have to deal with it later. Either because somebody's going to come and tell me what they really think of me, and I'm going to have to just experience it from the other side, or I'm going to build this anger is the way to solve my problems vritti, which is going to draw me back into it again and again. And it's not like you're suppressing, it's like you're weighing the odds, and it just doesn't look good to you anymore. It's not tasty anymore. My friend, Brian, who was here before, has sensitivity to gluten, and he talked about how even after he knew it was poisoning him, it took him longer than he is proud to admit before he just stopped doing it. And now, when he looks at it, the pain of it is more obvious than the pleasure of it. And that's when we really begin to shift. It just doesn't look pleasurable to me anymore. And that's why spiritually minded people just don't want to do the same things that they used to do, because it just doesn't look like fun anymore. Your vibration has changed. Whatever it might be, it's not pleasurable. It's not even like you're renouncing anything, it's just you're not drawn to it. Those are great days. Those are great days. And it's a balanced scale that's just like, it's like an assay scale, a goldsmith scale, like this kind of scale. And it's so delicate, because just that much of a shift. I think of it like your mind, your consciousness is like a marble, And even if the floor is only very slightly slanted, if you put the marble down, it'll go with the slant. And so I remember actually when I turned 36, I had a lot of complexes. So it wasn't merely that I had faults, I also had huge complexes about my faults. And when I was 36, just ever so slightly, those complexes began to recede. And as I said to Swamiji, I said it was like my subconscious mind, which had been working against me for all those 12 years prior to that, it just tipped that much. And then it suddenly began to work for me. And it was a total shift. Not that my character shifted, but it was just enough that all of a sudden I just had a little momentum in the right direction. It was 12 years after I started. I don't really like to tell people that, but it was. Anyway, any other questions or comments before we have a little music and then call it a night?
It's not so much a question, but I had the good fortune to watch the movie Awake twice in a row, twice in a soda.
This is the documentary about Yogananda that has all the live footage of him. Probably most of you have seen it.
And the second time, I really heard it clearly that a Californian computer man, I think, said, "Oh yes, he's talking about neuroplasticity," meaning Yogananda, 30 years before we even got hip to the idea. So it just shot through my head that what you describe here, which is brilliantly described, it's beautiful how you say everything. Is this a chicken or an egg question now? Or do they really go hand in hand?
The physical body is a manifestation of thought and energy. So the physical body is completely a result of more subtle energies that you're putting. Your DNA is because of your karma. Your karma is not created by your DNA. And neuroplasticity is the name of the game, because if you can change the energy, you change everything. Nothing is fixed. Now, even medically, as you're saying, the doctors have all discovered that the brain is constantly mutating, which is, of course, what the masters have always said. Nothing about us is fixed. Everything can be changed. Absolutely everything.
Regrooving our brain.
Right, regrooving our brains.
Within one lifetime.
Within one lifetime.
We can actually, I assume, reprogram the vrittis. Is that the connection?
No.
No?
By changing the vrittis, the brain changes. The vrittis are first. The vrittis are the first cause.
That's what
The brain is the manifestation of more subtle energies. The brain's just a physical organ.
Yeah.
And it would change the more subtle energies behind it, and the brain can be changed. Yogananda says you can regrow a severed limb.
Right.
But this is the difference, and this was Colleen's question too. In theory, it can be done, but merely to just affirm it is different than to actually have the energy at your command. Affirming it is a nice step. Believing it's possible is a nice step. But it's not the same as actually putting in the hard work to be capable of doing it. But believing that it's possible is a great help, especially as we become more chronologically developed. It's nice to know that there's nothing fixed here. All of it can just be, that's the yogis who live 150 years and look like they're 40. Because it's a game to them. The material world is just nothing fixed. We imagine it is. It's fixed to us because we do not know how yet to generate enough energy to shift the built-up pattern. But it's only a lack of our capacity to concentrate and focus enough energy. It's not a lack of the potential of that happening. It's gotten quite hot in here again, so maybe we should turn the air conditioner back on. And, Leo, were you going to say something? Pardon me? This is the last one.
So if we find that we don't have as much control yet, like there's all these parts of us that are caught up in vrittis and we don't have the capacity to use that energy. I'm just trying to think of a simple way of thinking of how do we liberate that energy?
Yogananda's original contribution to the science of yoga is what he called the energization exercises, in which he teaches you to draw and direct energy by the use of willpower. And so the energization exercises for the average person, and many of you I know are familiar with these, is one of the most important things that we have on our path. It's an essential element of Kriya Yoga. It's not the generating the energy through the chakras, but it's developing the capacity to have will, energy at your command, the command of your will, and then to direct that energy where you choose. And so it's a long process. How do you become an Olympic skier? You practice. How do I get to Carnegie Hall from here? Practice, practice, practice. I mean, that's the answer. It's just like that. It's the same thing. And the techniques that he brought are the way to do it. Okay, let's have a song, and then we'll call it a night.